Hello, and welcome back everyone to yet another episode of A to Z Chess Opening Series. In today's episode, we are going to learn about the alphabet G. And from G, the opening that we are learning today is the Grunfeld Defense. In Grunfeld Defense, White aims to acquire the center. He aims to control the center by being on E4, D4, and one of the pawns supporting the center by being on the C3 square. So, without wasting time, let's quickly get started. Starts with D4, and as white, we play our knight to F6. After the pawn c4, pawn g6, knight c3, the main idea here is not to play the pawn to d6 or pawn to e6 and go passive, but to attack in the center. We play our pawn to d5. The main line here is to exchange, and when white captures the pawn on the d5 square, we capture it back with the knight. After the move e4, we capture the knight, and now see, the thing I was talking about is the control in the center. E4, D4 and pawn being on the C3 square controlling the center. So this is a main idea for white, but in general the D4 pawn is the weakness and this is black's target. Black aims to attack the D4 pawn by 3-4 attackers and take the control of that square. How can we do that? We play our bishop to G7, aiming to attack at D4 first. And then our main idea is to push the pawn to C5. He won't be able to capture on the C5 square since this will be hanging. It will be a check and he'll lose the rook. Let's say here he goes with a normal looking move like knight f3. We can push up onto c5. Here, one thing that you should avoid if you're playing as black, I will tell you that thing towards the end of this video. So stay tuned and watch the video till the end. What you should actually not avoid and what is the main line here to play as black. So the main line here is to play pawn to c5. Once we play our pawn to c5 square, he cannot capture our pawn on c5 since the pawn on c3 is hanging. It will be a check and then double attack on the rook. So there are various ways how white can respond here. We'll start with bishop e2. So their main idea is to play bishop e2, bishop e3, queen to d2, castle, and they think that they are doing very well, like good in the development. But what you should do here is go with the knight to c6. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4 attackers, and there's only 2 defenders, right? Okay, if he plays his bishop to e3 here, then we are going to go bishop g4. Trying to give an attack to the knight, eliminate one of the defender of this pawn, and eventually you will win that pawn. So this is the main idea that you do as black. What if your opponent is not playing the bishop to e2, instead directly aiming for bishop e3 there? So bishop e3 protects the pawn. Don't waste a move. Don't play bishop e2, but play bishop e3, protecting the pawn on the d4 square. Now you can go with queen a5. Now what is the idea behind queen a5? Queen a5, the idea is to attack the c3 pawn over here, right? Queen comes to d2, protecting that c3 pawn, and we can castle. Now the idea behind castling is to attack on the d4 square. You look at this, the bishop, the pawn and the rook aims at the d4 square. Queen is also doing a great job being on a5, attacking the pawn on c3, which is defending the d4 pawn. Not only that, but you're also aiming to attack on e2. So your pieces are very well active. And not to forget, you still have the knight that can jump in on c6 and attack the d4 pawn further. Here, this pawn, he had played his rook to c1, defending the pawn on c3 twice. So there's no harm for white to push the pawn up to d5, not allowing us to play the knight to c6. Now here, at first it looks like the black is not doing great because the weakness in white's camp, the pawn on d4 is now on d5 and is well protected. So we are actually doing nothing. But don't go passive, go aggressive. As black, you play a pawn to e6. Now the idea behind e6 is he cannot capture the pawn. It's a pinned pawn. The queen will be in danger. And you are attacking. Now you have shifted your attack from d4 to d5. Nothing much. Here if he plays his pawn to c4, protecting that pawn further, then don't worry about this knight. What to do about this knight? We can't go to c6. So shall we develop it passively, go on d7? No. There's a very good maneuver that you can do from black of this knight is go knight a6, and then you can play a knight to b4. So since this c4 pawn is now pushed, that is, the queens are now trying to get exchanged. So you just exchange the queens, he captured it back with the knight, and we play our pawn to b6. Now pawn b6 solidifies this. The pawn on c5 was in danger, so solidified the structure. And not to forget, look at this monstrous bishop over here, the sniper, attacking the complete diagonal. The complete diagonal is now in black's control. So when he plays his bishop to e2, aiming to castle on the next move, we play a knight to a6, and the maneuver is knight to b4 here. He cannot play his pawn to a3 since you'll play bishop a2, b2, attack the rook and the pawn. So pawn a3 is not an option for him. Now after he castle, you go knight b4. You're attacking at the a2 square. So what if he plays his pawn to a3? Now we can play a knight to a2. Look at this knight. From b8 traveled all the way up to a2, attacking the rook. If now the rook goes to c2 square, as I said, look at the sniper, this bishop over here, controlling the complete diagonal. With the help of this bishop, you can go with the knight to c3. Now you're attacking this bishop on the e2 square. So a good way to save the bishop is to also the pawn is to come with the bishop to d3. Once he places bishop to d3, now we jump in with our bishop on a6 square. So this bishop is attacking the pawn on c4. The knight is attacking the pawn on e4. At first it looks that white has everything under control. He's having this d5 pawn, a dangerous pawn in the opponent's camp, protected by two of the pawns. But the base of the pawn chain is actually under attack. And slowly and eventually we are going to win it. Let's see how. Now, if he places rook to c1, trying to win this knight, then you can first capture on the d5 square. E takes on d5. After e takes on d5, now we can capture that d5 pawn with our knight. And suddenly all the pawns are vanished. Where are all the pawns gone? We have captured them, right? Now, if he captures your knight back, then he's losing the bishop. Once white saves his rook by going on the a2 square, now you can capture the pawn on d5, and this position is completely winning for black. Without a doubt, this is a complete winning position for black. You are already 2 pawns up, attack in the center, and all your pieces are well developed there, right? Alright. So as I was telling, one general mistake that you should avoid here as black, now is the time to spill the beans, and let me show you what you should do, what you should not do here. Now, after knight f3, castling looks tempting, right? It looks like you should castle and the position is under control, get the king into safety. Instead of playing that pawn c5, many of the players would play castling here. If you do the castling, then the position is slowly and slightly losing for black. Why? Because now after bishop e2, you play pawn c5, he'll castle. Once the king has moved out of that e1 square, now there's no attack on c3. There's no double attack that the bishop can go and attack and give a double attack there. Here there are three attackers on the pawn on d4. You're attacking here with the knight, with the queen, as well as the bishop. He'll have to defend it. Let's say he plays his bishop to e3, defending it. And now we go with bishop g4, trying to eliminate one of the defender. Here, white has a fantastic move. Can you find that move in the position? Comment your moves in the chat box. I vote so that you can think from the white side. Find the best move here as white. This is the position that came after white has castled very quickly in the position, and that's a major mistake. So if you found the move pawn to d5, you guys are absolutely correct, because pawn d5 is not giving away the rook in this position, but is also attacking the knight. Now, if black gets greedy and captures your rook, then you capture the bishop back with the. Now, the knight is in danger. He might just exchange it and protect the knight. Then you will play a bishop to h6, aiming for a quick checkmate on the g7 square. He'll have to defend the checkmate by pushing his pawn to f6, and then you and just end the game on spot. Don't capture the rook. You go for bishop to g4, aiming for bishop e6 check. Now, let's say if black saves his rook, then you go bishop e6 check. The king has only option is to go on the h8 square, and then comes pawn to e5. Even if black tries to defend this position by going with knight to c4 square, then you play rook e1. He cannot capture your pawn with the knight, because after all these captures, it will be a checkmate. And in this position, he cannot move his rook. There's no square for the rook to move. He cannot get this rook in the game. He cannot move the queen, because then he will just capture on the f6 square, and down that file, it will be a checkmate. So This is one thing that you should avoid as black if you're playing the Grunfeld defense. Don't go for early castling. Play the pawn to c5 first. Don't give an extra tempo to your opponent to get his king into the safety. Play bishop e2 and castle. Alright. Alright, this was all about the Grunfeld defense. I hope you enjoyed this video and got to learn something out of it. If yes, then please hit that subscribe button, like to my channel, and share with your chess friends. Thank you.